Welcome to Slaying with Santos. If you're new here, hola, I'm your host, Melissa Santos. Join me as we dive into the dark and twisted minds of criminals, revealing the stories that lurk just beyond the flicker of candlelight. So today's story is a story of love, a story of violence, bodybuilding, and a faithful Valentine's Day that ended in bloodshed. This is the story of Sally McNeel, known to the world as Killer Sally. If you've seen the Netflix 3-episode series Killer Sally, you know that this case is a roller coaster of emotions and morally gray areas. Was Sally a victim fighting for her life or a calculated killer driven by jealousy? That's the question we're diving into today. So buckle up for a wild ride and let's get started. So let me set the stage for you. Sally McNeel was a Marine turned amateur bodybuilder who started lifting while in the Marines because she wanted to be strong and be able to defend herself, and she became just that. At just a mere 5'2", she was a woman who could very well bench press more than most men I know and wasn't afraid to show it. She loved being the center of attention. She was tough, she was bold, and she had a larger-than-life personality. In the late 1980s, she was introduced by a close friend to Ray McNeel. He was a fellow bodybuilder and an ex-Marine, so they had a lot in common, and they met at the gym in California. This is like a bodybuilder's couple's dream, right? And as Sally says in the Netflix documentary, it was lust at first sight. She just thought he was poor cute, right? So Ray was chiseled. He was a chiseled Adonis, and she said that he looked like the statue of David, a Mr. Olympia contender with dreams of bodybuilding stardom. And check this, they married just 2 months after meeting in 1987, which, I don't know, to me is a red flag, and to some is a red flag, but for Sally and Ray, it was a passion-fueled destiny. It was like bodybuilding soap opera, super cute. And they were really a match made in bodybuilding heaven. But behind the flexing and the trophies and everything else, their marriage was a pressure cooker. Because both Sally and Ray were competitive, they were driven, but also crucially using anabolic steroids, which, as we'll see later on, played a big role in their story. Sally had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Shantina and John, who called Ray dad. Like, he was the father figure. The family lived in Oceanside, California, immersed in the intense, often, sometimes bizarre, sometimes seedy world of bodybuilding. Sally even ran a side hustle called Killer Sally, a wrestling business where clients paid her to dominate them physically, a gig that later raised eyebrows and haunted her in court. Now, here's where it gets dark. Sally and Ray's relationship wasn't just competitive, it was violent. Sally claims Ray abused her for years. He would sometimes choke her, he broke her nose, and even attacked her in front of her kids. Shantina, who was only about 11 at the time, recalls hearing a gurgling noise one night, like her mom was being choked. Ray's friends, though, painted a completely different picture, saying Sally was the aggressive one, with a temper that matched her muscles, one friend said. But the truth? Who knows, probably somewhere in between, in the middle somewhere, because one thing is clear. It was toxic, and it was a volatile relationship. And it seemed to be fueled by some unresolved trauma on both sides, tons of violence, and maybe, again, tons of steroids. But to really understand how they both ended up, how they did, we have to really start at the very beginning of their lives. So let's start with Sally. She was born Sally Loudon in 1960. She grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in a home where violence was just normal. Sally's stepfather, Richard, physically abused her mother and abused her. It was just abuse masked as discipline. Sally describes being hit with belts, with fists, and whatever really was handy. She was going to get hit with that, often for minor infractions like talking back or not doing chores fast enough. Her mother was trapped in her own cycle of abuse and really couldn't protect her. Sally recalls one incident where her stepfather threw her against the wall so hard it left bruises for weeks. And she was just like 10 or 11 at this time, and she learned really early on that pain was part of life. I mean, that's what she thought. She once said, "I thought that's how families were. You got hit, you took it, and then you moved on." And that mindset stuck. It really stuck with her into her and just trickled down into her other relationships. So by her late teens, Sally was just toughening up, right? Getting into fights at school just to prove she wasn't weak. She channeled all her anger into sports, though, excelling at track and swimming. But the rage from her childhood never left. And a childhood friend interviewed in the series said Sally was sweet, but you could see the fire in her. And you know what's really sad is that she was such an excellent athlete, and many people said she could go to the Olympics, that she would have gone to the Olympics, but she didn't have a safe space, she didn't have support, and she didn't have the money either. One thing's for sure, violent encounters followed her along her entire life. Her first marriage to Marine Anthony Loudon was more of just the same. He beat her regularly, once breaking her nose, and by the time she left him, she had 2 kids, Shantina and John, and a belief that love and violence were twistedly intertwined. So now, let's set the stage for Ryan McNeel, because his childhood was just as rough. And it's really key to understanding this entire tragedy. Ray was born in 1964 and grew up in a fractured family. Friends and family describe Ray as a kid abandoned by his parents really early on. His mother struggled with addiction, and his father was largely absent, leaving Ray and his other siblings to really just fend for themselves. By the time Ray was 10 years old, he was bouncing between foster homes where neglect and occasional physical abuse were all too common. One foster sibling interviewed in the series recalled Ray getting beaten by a foster parent for stealing food from the kitchen. He was just hungry, but the punishment was so severe. And this instability left Ray with deep needs, and a deep need for control and validation. He learned to charm people. It was like a coping mechanism. And he used this charm, this charisma to get what he wanted. And it developed into a manipulative streak. As one of his Marine buddies put it, Ray could make you love him, but he always had an agenda. It's really sad. Ray found refuge in bodybuilding as a teenager, a way to build not just his body, but his identity. It gave him the attention he craved, but also fed his ego. The Netflix series highlights how Ray's childhood abandonment made him view relationships. He viewed them as transactions. People were tools to achieve his goals, whether it was for money, status, or success in bodybuilding. He joined the Marines, just like Sally, seeking structure, but he carried his insecurities with him. So by the time he met Sally, Ray was a mix of charm, ambition, and unfortunately volatile energy. A temper that could flare up without warning, especially now that it's fueled by steroids. So let's fast forward to February 1995, Valentine's Day. It's supposed to be a day of love, but for Sally and Ray, it was the day everything fell apart. Ray came home late, after 10 p.m., to their apartment in Oceanside. According to Sally, they got into a heated argument. She says Ray was choking her, he was hitting her, and he was beating her. She feared for her life. And in a split-second decision, Sally says she grabbed a sawed-off shotgun she'd bought for protection, shot Ray once in the abdomen, and then, as he was moving and lunging towards her, she shot him again in the face. Ray was dead. Sally called 911 herself. Her voice was shaky but clear. "I shot my husband because he was beating me." Her daughter, Shantina, was only 12 at the time and was in the apartment, and she heard and witnessed all the chaos. You can hear You can hear her in the 911 call. Shantina is wailing in the background, a gut-wrenching moment, really, that sticks with you. Sally didn't deny killing Ray, but she insisted it was self-defense, that it was a desperate act to save herself from years of abuse. But the prosecution had a different story. They argued that it was premeditated murder, that it was fueled by jealousy over Ray's alleged affairs and his plans to leave Sally for another woman. Apparently, he was always cheating on her. They pointed to the 2 shots, especially the second one. The second one was right to the face, and it was evidence that she intended to kill him, not just defend herself. And then there was physical evidence, or the lack thereof. So there was no DNA from Sally found on Ray to support her claiming of her being choked and beaten that night. Blood splatter on the living room walls, on the living room lamp, and the trajectory of the bullets also raised doubts about her story. This case wasn't just about what happened last night. It was about how people saw Sally also. The media called her the brawny bride and the pumped-up princess, painting her as a monster who couldn't possibly be a victim because she was so strong. And also, let's talk about the media climate in the mid-90s. So, because it was wild. This was the era of angry women dominating headlines. Think about it. We had Lorena Bobbitt, who cut off her husband's penis in 1993 after years of alleged abuse, and it was all over the news. It turned into like a punchline despite her claims of self-defense. We have Amy Fisher, the Long Island Lolita, who shot her lover's wife in 1992, sparking a media frenzy about jealous, violent women. And then you had Tanya Harding, tied to the 1994 attack on Nancy Kerrigan. She was portrayed as a ruthless competitor who would do anything to win. These cases created a cultural narrative that women who committed violent acts were unhinged, they were dangerous, and unworthy of sympathy. Sally McNeel walked into a media storm. The public was already primed to see her as another angry woman, not a victim of abuse. Her Killer Sally wrestling persona, where she played a dominant, aggressive character, absolutely didn't help either, especially when the prosecution played those videos of her. She was in army gear. She was like holding a shotgun, actually the same shotgun she used to kill Ray. And as director Nanette Bernstein says in the Netflix series, this case was a prism for bigger issues: domestic violence, gender roles, and a justice system shaped by the media that loved vilifying women who fought back. So Sally's trial began on Valentine's Day, 1996, exactly a year after the shooting. Talk about dramatic timing. The courtroom was a circus. Media swarming to cover the bodybuilder murderess. Sally's defense leaned heavily on the battered woman syndrome, which we now understand as PTSD from intimate partner violence. She testified about years of abuse from Ray, backed up by her daughter Shantina, who described seeing her mom bruised and beaten. But Sally's son John was only 9 at the time and was not allowed to testify, which kind of limited her. The prosecution, led by Deputy DA Daniel Goldstein, though, was ruthless. This man was ruthless. They portrayed Sally as a thug and bully, arguing that a muscular ex-Marine couldn't possibly be a victim of domestic abuse. Goldstein even said in court, a violent person could not be a battered woman. That line kind of stings still because we know that's not true, and it shows how the 90s justice system struggled with women who didn't really fit the stereotype of this helpless victim. Also, side note, Sally's lawyer asked her to purposely not work out, stop lifting weights, because the media can't possibly back you up if you look strong. It's just so interesting because the climate now is completely different. Women are like working out. I mean, back then they were, but now it's almost like normal to see strong women, and you wouldn't automatically think because a woman is strong and she lifts weights and, you know, she's just this tough kind of persona that she wouldn't be a victim. Anyway, moving on. The Killer Sally wrestling videos were a turning point also. The prosecution played clips of Sally in character holding a shotgun, which painted her as this violent aggressor rather than this person who was attacked, right, who was being abused. And as Bursting notes, this wasn't evidence. It was really theater, but it swayed the jury. Sally's own violent incidents didn't help because she had a past as well. One documented case involved Sally assaulting a fellow Marine during a heated argument in the barracks. Reports say she punched the woman after a dispute over a training exercise or something like that, and it landed her in hot water with a formal reprimand. Another incident saw Sally disciplined for throwing a chair during a confrontation with a superior officer who criticized her performance. She threw a whole chair, guys. I don't know why that's funny to me. It's not funny, but it is. Like, I have a wrestling background, so I just imagine her, like, going in. And because she did some wrestling later, I'm like, okay. I mean, I get where it comes from now. She once assaulted one of Ray's lovers, leading to a year-long suspension from bodybuilding. And she also threatened the police officer at a bar fight. These write-ups painted a picture of a quick-tempered woman. It painted her as the aggressor, not the victim. And in the end, the jury convicted Sally of second-degree murder, meaning they believed she intended to kill Ray but didn't plan it in advance. She was sentenced to 19 years to life. Sally served 25 years at the Central California Women's Facility before being paroled in 2020. The Netflix series shows her release. Eating at McDonald's. She was eating a McDonald's burger saying, "Freedom tastes wonderful." But the cost was steep. Her kids grew up without her, and they both struggled with their own cycles of violence. It's like it doesn't end, right? It's almost ingrained in the DNA, unfortunately. And unless someone stops it, it will continue. So I feel so bad for her kids. So was Sally McNeel a victim who snapped, or a jealous wife who planned a murder? Let's break it down. The series does a great job of showing both sides, but it left me with tons of questions. Sally's story is compelling. Years of abuse, a childhood of trauma, and a marriage fueled by steroids and competition. Her 911 calls sound genuine, and Shantina's testimony really backs that up as well. Plus, studies like one from the Verna Institute of Justice shows that 77% of incarcerated women in the U.S. are survivors of intimate partner violence. Sally's not alone in this pattern, but the prosecution's case had too much weight. No DNA on Ray to prove he attacked her that night, how she claimed. The second shot to the face felt personal, not defensive. And Sally's own violent history, attacking Ray's lover, threatening cops, makes her seem less like a victim and more like an aggressor. So the court didn't have sympathy for her for that reason. They didn't buy the battered woman syndrome. And it was partly because, again, Sally didn't look like this perfect victim. And as Bernstein says, the legal system wasn't prepared for a woman who was physically strong. You have to remember that. Social media reactions now, especially on X, show how divided people are on this case. One user wrote, "Sally McNeel in that questioning room with her kids is heartbreaking. Where is the justice? Hashtag Killer Sally." Another said, "She killed someone who was going to leave her. She has no accountability." I'll be honest. Honestly, as per my research, I really didn't come across many easy answers. Sally's strength and aggression didn't fit the mold, but that doesn't mean she also wasn't a victim. One key point in the defense was the steroids, too. And I want to make this point very clear because Ray's roid rage and Sally's own use probably escalated their fights to a deadly level, even though when Sally was tested for anabolic steroids, she tested negative. There was no steroids in her system. So was her killing of Ray just pure and unadulterated rage? No steroids were involved there. And after 25 years in prison, and when Sally was paroled in 2020 and moved to the Veterans Transition Center in California, she ended up being reunited with her kids. And her kids have struggled without her. Shantina and John both faced legal troubles, echoing the cycle of violence Sally had described. Like I mentioned before, it's in the DNA, and it must be stopped. Sally's now trying to rebuild, but the scars will remain forever. This case changed how we talk about domestic violence. It exposed the flaws in the 1990s justice system, especially for women who don't fit the victim stereotype. That was the story of Sally McNeel, a woman caught in a cycle of violence that ended in tragedy. That's still debated today. Was she a killer or was she a survivor? I'll let you decide. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about Sally's story and what it says about the justice system and domestic abuse? Subscribe and share Slaying with Santos to stay in the loop. And until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and stay informed.